There's a truth about attraction that most men never realize. Women don't always feel desire the moment they meet a man. What you interpret as lack of interest isn't always a closed door. Sometimes it's her being careful. Sometimes it's quiet curiosity she refuses to reveal. And sometimes she simply hasn't experienced the version of you that could shift her entire understanding of who you are. Attraction isn't always a lightning strike. For many women, it starts as a slow, subtle shift, an emotional unfolding shaped by the way a man carries himself, how he communicates, how he behaves, and the energy he brings into a room long before she ever acknowledges he has her attention. This is where so many men get it wrong. They assume that if she doesn't react immediately, they've already lost. They think one neutral expression means she's uninterested forever. But that's not how women make decisions. A woman rarely forms her complete impression the instant she meets someone. She forms it over time based on the man she sees consistently in front of her. And nobody teaches men this. Nobody explains how to awaken attraction in a woman who seems emotionally distant, not through emotional games or fake confidence, but through presence, grounded energy, subtle self-assurance, and a calm masculinity that makes her feel something she didn't expect. Women respond to feelings, not just looks. When she senses a man who knows his own worth, who doesn't chase attention, who stays composed instead of reactive, and who has emotional depth without neediness, something inside her begins to relax. Even if she barely noticed him at first, her guard slowly lowers, her curiosity grows, her perception shifts. This video isn't about forcing interest from someone unavailable. It's about understanding the psychological mechanisms that naturally reshape how a woman views you, how her mind reevaluates you, how her body responds to you, and how her attention starts drifting in your direction without you pushing for it. Once a man understands this, he stops trying to win her and instead becomes someone she naturally gravitates toward. And that single shift can change the entire dynamic. What many men don't realize is that the way attraction works hasn't changed, but the world around it has. Decades ago, a woman formed her impressions through extended interaction. She looked at how a man carried himself in real moments, his patience, his character, the way he spoke, his small gestures, the comfort of his presence, the steadiness of his personality. She watched who he was over time. Attraction wasn't rushed or pressured. It was allowed to develop. Today, everything moves faster. People are overstimulated. Women deal with countless interactions, messages, attention, noise. Because of that, many become more reserved in the beginning. The first reaction you see from her is rarely the full truth. Sometimes it's her being cautious. Sometimes it's her trying to understand your intentions. Sometimes she's simply observing who you are before she decides anything. And men misinterpret this every day. They expect instant enthusiasm, and when they don't receive it, they immediately assume she's not interested. But women still fall for men in the same timeless ways, through emotional security, consistency, presence, and how she feels when she's near him. What's different now is how quickly men expect a reaction. A lot of guys get discouraged the moment she doesn't mirror their interest. They don't realize she might be evaluating something deeper: your patience, your composure, the way you handle pressure, whether you're centered or chaotic, whether you respect yourself, or whether your interest is genuine or just impulsive. These qualities take time to surface, and women notice all of them. Women today might appear harder to impress, but the truth is they're filtering faster. Not because they're cold or arrogant, but because they're surrounded by shallow attention every single day. Compliments mean nothing. A few messages mean nothing. Surface-level charm doesn't touch them. What impacts them is a man whose presence feels different: grounded, calm, intentional, steady, not rushed, not needy, not performing for approval. This is why a woman who didn't show interest at first can suddenly begin noticing you later. She may not have felt attraction immediately, but she sensed something else: respect, comfort, curiosity, or simply that you weren't trying to force anything. Women respond gradually to authenticity. They open emotionally when something feels safe and real. When a man understands that her first reaction isn't the final verdict, he stops quitting too early and starts showing up in a way that makes her feel at ease. And when a woman feels safe around you, desire begins to grow naturally. Here's where everything shifts: the power dynamic. If you want a woman who seems indifferent to become interested, you must understand something crucial. Attraction doesn't ignite when you try to prove yourself to her. It ignites when she starts seeing qualities in you she didn't expect. The fastest way for that spark to appear is through a shift in power. Right now, whether you realize it or not, she holds the advantage. She's deciding whether she likes you. She's the one you're evaluating yourself against. She's the one you're subtly trying to impress. As long as you put her on the pedestal and treat yourself like the applicant, her interest will remain low. Your job in this phase isn't to convince her. It isn't to chase her. It isn't to perform for her approval. Your job is to change the dynamic so she starts seeing you differently, not as a man trying to earn a spot in her life, but as a man whose presence naturally commands attention. Your energy shifts, your value rises, and without forcing anything, she begins to lean in. Because the moment you stop acting like you're waiting for her approval, the entire frame changes. You move from, "I hope you like me," to, "Let's see if you actually belong in my world." This isn't manipulation, and it isn't a game. It's simply resetting the psychological pattern that caused her to place you in the background or in some neutral category she didn't take seriously. And when you shift that frame correctly, everything she thought she understood about you begins to rearrange itself in her mind. It starts with removing the pressure she feels coming from you. Women can feel when a man wants them. They can sense when he's watching their reactions, analyzing every message, hoping for a specific outcome. The moment she detects that hopeful, lingering energy, her interest softens because she feels chosen without having done anything to earn it. So you pull that entire vibe out of the interaction. You let the air breathe again. You keep things light. You stop using heavy compliments about her looks. You don't dissect her texting rhythm or try to build emotional chemistry through long paragraphs. You stop presenting yourself as someone waiting for something to happen. Instead, you shift into a man who already has direction, purpose, momentum. A man who doesn't need to convince her of anything because his life already speaks for him. She's used to men pushing, chasing, trying to impress. So when you stop exerting that pressure, her sense of control disappears for a second. And that tiny moment creates tension, not negative tension, but the type that sparks curiosity. Curiosity is the first crack in her indifference. Then you match her energy, not higher, not lower, but equal. You're not pretending to be above her, and you're not acting uninterested. You're simply pacing yourself with the rhythm she gives you. If she responds slowly, you respond slowly. If her messages are short, yours are proportional. If her tone is dry, you don't compensate by trying harder. You allow the dryness to stand on its own without trying to revive it. And this does something subtle but powerful. It removes her role as the one directing the pace. When she realizes she's not leading the interaction anymore, she feels something unfamiliar. That's when she glances at her phone twice. That's when she wonders why you aren't following the pattern every other guy follows. That's when she starts asking herself questions. And questions are always the beginning of interest. But the real shift happens when you show her something she didn't expect: selective attention. When you're warm, engaging, respectful, yet slightly unpredictable in how available you are, she becomes intrigued. Sometimes you're there, relaxed and easygoing. Other times you're simply not reachable, not as a tactic, but because you genuinely have a life happening beyond her. That unpredictability creates emotional contrast. One moment she feels certain of your presence, the next she realizes she doesn't have full access to you. That contrast catches her off guard, and the moment she can't fully predict you, her mind begins to replay little interactions with you. She checks your profile more often. She notices when you're online. She replies faster without understanding why. Not because she suddenly fell for you, but because her brain is trying to figure you out. And the human mind always pays attention to what it can't control. From here, your focus shifts to triggering emotions she can't ignore. When a woman doesn't feel interest yet, it means no emotional imprint has formed in her mind. Women become drawn to a man when something about him sticks: a small spark of mystery, a moment of warmth, a flicker of intrigue, a hint of admiration, or even a subtle confusion that leaves her thinking about you later. Attraction is born from emotion, not logic. So your job in this phase is to create little emotional impressions, moments that stay with her long after the conversation ends. These moments don't make her fall in love, but they make her notice you. And once she notices you, desire has room to grow. You begin by introducing micro-mystery instead of long explanations. Most men talk too much. They reveal their entire life story trying to prove they're interesting, and in doing so, they remove the very thing that fuels attraction, curiosity. You offer just enough to keep her engaged while leaving space for her imagination to wander. She asks what you do, and instead of giving your entire resume, you say something like, "A bit of everything, I'll tell you the fun parts later." It's light, it's playful, and it keeps her wondering. She asks why you were offline, and you give a simple, intriguing hint instead of a full breakdown. These small gaps make her brain fill in the blanks, and every time she fills in those blanks, she thinks of you again. Then you create one emotional signature, a vibe she naturally associates with you. Every woman remembers the people who make her feel something specific. One man stands out because he's funny, another because he's bold, another because he's calm, mysterious, or effortlessly confident. You choose a tone that feels authentic to you and maintain it consistently. It could be quiet confidence, subtle playfulness, a controlled calm, or a lightly teasing energy. This consistency creates emotional familiarity, the kind that makes her start seeking that feeling again without realizing it. Finally, you adjust the dynamic again, this time not by mirroring her lack of effort, but by matching her tone and elevating it slightly. When she's short but polite, you respond short but with a light spark. When she's slow but steady, you remain slow but warm. When she's dry, you don't chase. You add a touch of humor or a bit of wit that lifts the energy without overwhelming her. This shows emotional intelligence and gives her a positive feeling without making her feel pursued. And that balance, being uplifting without being overeager, is rare enough that it captures a woman's attention almost instantly. Because what you're doing isn't chasing and it isn't pulling away. It's creating movement in her emotions. And emotional movement is what women respond to far more than anything logical or planned. Most men swing in extremes. They either suffocate her with attention or they shut down completely to look detached. But you're not doing either of those things. You're creating a current she can feel. You're giving her small, controlled moments of positivity that feel natural, not forced, not desperate. And when a woman experiences those kinds of moments, light, intentional, confident, it becomes incredibly attractive because it shows you aren't reacting to her. You're simply being yourself. Controlled positivity is powerful because it stands out in a world full of men who either overtry or undertry. As she warms up, something subtle begins to happen. She initiates a bit more, she replies quicker. Her tone softens, and that's when you introduce something she never sees coming. A single, well-timed compliment. Not at the beginning, not when she's uninterested, not when you're still trying to create momentum. You wait until she shows a flicker of effort, just a little shift. Then, in a calm moment, you offer a compliment that isn't about her looks, something that feels real. It could be the way her presence feels, or something unique you noticed about her personality. A soft line like, you have a really calming energy. That's rare, hits 10 times harder than any surface-level praise. Or something like, you're actually more interesting than I expected, lands with weight because she senses it's sincere, and because you didn't give it away easily. Now she feels she earned it, and earned validation has emotional impact. It sticks. It makes her want to continue impressing you. That entire phase is about leaving little mental fingerprints, subtle impressions she can't shake even when she tries. Not heavy gestures, not dramatic effort, just small hits of emotional resonance. That's how you shift a woman's perception. That's how someone who barely noticed you begins seeing you in a completely different light. And once that door opens, you begin building tension. Real attraction always has a thread of tension running through it, a kind of gentle pressure she can feel even if she doesn't know how to describe it. It's the reason she glances at you again, the reason she replays parts of your conversations, the reason she becomes aware of your presence without understanding why. This tension forms when you move at your own rhythm instead of rushing the moment she gives you a little attention. Most men jump the second they sense an opportunity, and in doing so, they smother the spark before it ever grows. But when you remain composed, warm, relaxed, and steady, she naturally synchronizes with your energy. Women follow the emotional pace of the man they're drawn to, and when your pace is grounded, she sinks into it without realizing it's happening. Silence becomes part of that tension, too. Most men panic when there's space in the conversation. They think silence signals rejection or boredom, but women actually feel safer and more intrigued around men who are comfortable with pauses. When she says something meaningful and you take a moment before responding, it signals depth. When you slow down your words naturally, she leans in, listening more closely. That soft quietness, when it isn't awkward, when it's simply part of your natural presence, creates a pull that most men never tap into because they're terrified of stillness. But stillness is masculine, and women respond to that. There's also a playful tension that comes from light, warm friction, a bit of gentle contrast that makes the moment feel alive. Not cold sarcasm, not rude teasing, but a subtle challenge that adds spark. When she's trying to be overly serious and you soften the mood with a small joke or a knowing smile, she feels comfortable. When she's clearly trying to impress you and you respond with quiet amusement instead of instant validation, she feels intrigued. She starts wondering what you're thinking, and that curiosity keeps her mentally engaged with you long after the conversation ends. Tension deepens when your standards naturally show themselves. When she realizes you're not easily swayed, not dazzled by looks alone, not desperate for her time or approval, she starts reassessing you. You're not performing for her. You're not waiting for her to choose you. You have your own life, your own pace, your own priorities, and she has to adjust to your rhythm, not the other way around. Women gravitate toward men who carry that quiet certainty. All of these small shifts become one powerful emotional impression. Something about you feels different, more stable, more masculine, more intentional. And even if she wasn't drawn to you at first, this tension begins working on her slowly, quietly, but undeniably. From here, you spark her curiosity without losing yourself. Every interaction reaches a point where a woman pauses internally and thinks, "Who is he really?" Most men ruin that moment because they panic. They dump their entire life story trying to look impressive, or they become overly accessible, revealing everything too quickly. And when a man does that, he destroys the very force that could have pulled her toward him. Real mystery isn't an act. It's the natural aura of a man who knows who he is and doesn't feel the need to explain himself constantly. Curiosity is one of the strongest triggers in female attraction. When she senses there's more to you beneath the surface, she starts observing you differently. She watches your behavior. She picks up on subtle details. She notices things she ignored before. Her attention sharpens. This kind of curiosity isn't created through manipulation, it's created through self-awareness. Men often confuse vulnerability with oversharing, but true vulnerability is selective. It's revealed in small, genuine pieces at the right moments. When you share parts of yourself slowly, she feels like she's discovering you. And women love discovering. Discovery is intimacy. Discovery is bonding. Discovery is attraction. They love peeling back layers, but that only happens when a man leaves just enough space for her curiosity to breathe. And that curiosity doesn't grow when you're centering your entire identity around how she reacts to you. Too many men hand away their power because they want approval so badly that they start reshaping themselves into whatever they imagine she wants. But a woman isn't drawn to a man who folds himself to fit into her hands. She's drawn to the man who stands firmly enough that she has to shift a little to understand him. That quiet difference changes everything because suddenly you're not performing, you're simply being, and she feels the difference instantly. This is where most men slip. They talk themselves out of opportunities because they walk into interactions as if they're interviewing for a position in her life. Their energy becomes eager instead of composed, responsive instead of steady, reassuring before reassurance is even needed. And then they're surprised when she loses interest. But the truth is simple. Women feel attraction toward men who move at their own rhythm, not hers. When she observes that your world doesn't freeze because she entered it, her curiosity spikes. She starts imagining what your life looks like without her. She thinks about who you are when you're not in front of her. She sees glimpses of your depth and begins projecting possibilities onto you. And once a woman starts imagining you, once you become a thought in the back of her mind instead of a man begging for her attention, desire takes its first breath. There's a mental shift every woman goes through, a subtle turning point that men almost never notice. It's the moment her internal narrative changes from, I don't see him that way, to, why am I thinking about him? And that moment has nothing to do with how much you try to win her. It doesn't happen when you impress her, flatter her, or attempt to prove your worth. It happens when some part of you disrupts the box she originally placed you in. Because make no mistake, every woman places a man into a category the moment she meets him. Friend, background, not my type. But what she rarely expects is for a man to evolve in front of her eyes without trying to convince her of anything. Attraction rises when her first impression of you becomes outdated. It begins the second she notices something that contradicts the version she mentally assigned you. Maybe she assumed you were predictable, and then you say something that reveals depth she didn't anticipate. Maybe she expected you to be eager, and instead you show patience that feels grounded and uncommon. Maybe she thought you were passive until she witnesses you handle a moment with calm, quiet assertiveness. Women notice these shifts deeply, not because they're judging you, but because feminine psychology is built to read subtle signals that most men don't even realize they're sending. The moment you step outside the mental box she created for you, her curiosity turns on like a light. She starts watching you more intentionally. She pays attention to the tone of your voice, the way you respond, the way you carry yourself. Not because you pushed harder, but because you surprised her naturally, without trying to shape her perception. What truly transforms her interest is not perfection or performance, but consistency. When the energy you give her remains steady over time, when your presence stays calm regardless of how she behaves, when your attention doesn't disappear yet doesn't cling, she begins to feel something she didn't feel before. A kind of safety that isn't soft or friendly, but masculine and grounding. The kind that makes her nervous system settle even when she didn't intend to let her guard down. And here's the part men struggle to accept. A woman doesn't fall because you persuade her. She falls because she senses something around you she can't find anywhere else. It might be emotional peace. It might be the way you bring lightness into serious moments. It might be your mystery. Or it might be the way you see her without projecting fantasies onto her. When a woman finds herself replaying a simple sentence you said after the conversation ends, wondering why your energy stayed with her longer than expected, that's the beginning of attraction. Not from effort, not from pressure, but from presence. Women don't fall for men who chase them. They fall for men whose presence changes the emotional atmosphere around them. And if she wasn't interested before, this is the phase where her curiosity begins turning into something warmer without any force from your side. Attraction isn't a formula, and it's never as shallow as people claim. A woman doesn't suddenly want a man because he said the perfect line or memorized the ideal strategy. She becomes drawn to him because he makes her feel something she wasn't prepared to feel. And this is where many men blind themselves. Sometimes the reason she wasn't drawn to you in the beginning is because you weren't showing the version of yourself she could respect. That's a difficult truth, but it's also the most powerful one. Because the moment you stop seeking validation, the moment you stop shrinking or exaggerating parts of yourself to earn attention, you automatically become the kind of man whose presence stands out. A man who doesn't chase approval becomes centered. A man who doesn't scramble for reactions becomes grounded. A man who doesn't contort himself to be chosen becomes magnetic. And if there's one thing you take from this entire message, let it be this. Attraction grows not when you convince her to want you, but when you become a man whose energy is impossible to ignore. And the reason that energy becomes impossible to ignore is simple. A woman may not choose you at first, but she will always feel pulled toward a man who chooses himself. When you move from self-respect instead of insecurity, when your emotions stay steady instead of reactive, she feels a kind of presence that most men never develop. That steadiness becomes the quiet magnet she senses long before she admits it to herself. And while some people may disagree with everything you just heard, that doesn't change its truth. Attraction isn't decided by opinions, it's shaped by how a man shows up in his own life. To everyone listening, especially the men here, because they want to grow instead of complain, I appreciate you. I see the effort you're putting into becoming better, and I want you to keep choosing that path. Tell me in the comments what part of this message hit you the hardest, and I'll respond personally, because this isn't a place where you simply watch. It's a place where we evolve together. And before you go, prepare yourself for the next video. There's a specific behavior women show when they're emotionally done with a man, and almost no one recognizes it until it's too late.